Hello, everybody, and welcome back to lesson 35 of class. Why science works when it has to. Because they're up. So let's get into it, right? So let's start with COVID as a draft or an example, right? If the science community, the medical community have been so efficient with it within a short amount of time for something that was unknown, then, well, why haven't they solved the problems of the other illnesses out there? I mean, think about it, right? Maybe because it doesn't affect them, and since it doesn't affect them and they could still profit off of it, or should I say profiteer? See, there's nothing wrong with profiting, right? Because profiting is when you're in business, you have your net profit, and then of course that's what you catch because you catch it in a net, right? If you were fishing, whatever the case may be. Now, there's revenue, so on and so forth. That's great. However, when you're profiteering, right? Think of a tier, right? You cry when you lose money, you cry when you lose other things, so on and so forth. So when you're profiteering, not only are you making money, but you're doing it in, how do I say this? The wrong fashion, right? So it causes people to tier. So profiteering and then profiting are two different things. Remember that. Especially if you're like in accounting and you need to understand how to communicate with a lawyer. You want to say profiteering, meaning they're cooking the books, profiting if they're, running straight. So let's go to the next point. Why, and this was said by a gentleman that was speaking to Dr. Jordan Peterson. Why do snakes represent knowledge and move on their bellies? Not crawl on their bellies, lay on their bellies, so on and so forth. Well, I think I mentioned this in another video where they were talking about how, well, snakes represent knowledge. Well, those who are knowledgeable use their knowledge to, better their lives, etc. Now, when they become complacent, they don't move around as much. If not, they move slowly, but when they strike, it's deadly like a snake, right? So let's say you were going into business and you wanted to go into the phone space or technology in general, right? Well, you're going to have Microsoft as a competitor. You're going to have Apple as a competitor. You don't have to worry about Nike because that's an apparel company. You're in the tech space, right? Not unless you do something to compete with them. I mean, yes, they have the Nike watch, but what if you can have shoes that have like a little air tag that syncs up to the phone and then it tracks your steps more efficiently? Also, it also acts as a way of a security feature. If your sneakers ever get stolen, you can use, like on iPhones, Find My Phone. And then if your sneakers are ever stolen or you get mugged for your sneakers, you could always find your sneakers or give that information to somebody who can actually help you. So things like that, right? But if that's the case, then it makes sense why they move slowly, because they might have gained weight, right? They don't move around as much, right? Squirrels aren't crawling around, they're running around all the time, right? Like they got all this energy. Same thing with other types of animals. And, well, sometimes that could be related in the form of a metaphor, analogy, or entendre, possibly being used all at the same time, specifically to condense information very quickly. So let's continue. Why is it good to, how do I say this, gamify learning? Well, if you ever played the game Assassin's Creed, if you've seen the logo, it's like the letter A, and then it has like this like rocker underneath it. It kind of looks like a chevron if you were in the army and you're a specialist. If you became a staff sergeant in the military, so on and so forth, they have the rocker. And then of course, well, what could that mean? What does it refer to? And if you played the game, you would understand history and how certain things linked together, right? Same concept if you played Final Fantasy, read comic books, and then you played that out in your life a little bit. See, because people do have to learn, but they all have different ways of doing it, right? Now, when it comes to studying body language, one of the things that I learned very early on was to how do I say this? How to identify what type of learner someone is. Now, a lot of people will say like, oh, if you look this way, that way, so on and so forth. And, I will put up proof and I'll try to get the links for it. But for instance, if the person is a visual learner, they will normally look up when recalling a memory because that's how they recall and take in information. They do things visually. If they look sideways, left or right, so on and so forth, what's it called? And people will get into further like definitions on what each side means, but it takes a lot more than that, yes? However, if they look left or right, they're auditory learners, right? So they learn by hearing, right? Not just by other ways, but that's their most dominant one. So that's why they look at that when they're recalling some type of memory. Now, for the people who are kinesthetic learners, the people that actually have to do things in order to learn, so on and so forth, they will look down because normally when you're constructing something, you take a number 2 pencil and start writing something down, you're looking down, right? So they're already formulating in their brain, right, whatever it is that they're drawing, constructing, sketching, etc., yada yada. So when I look at different things, I come to this mentality where, well, there has to be a connection and a reason for it. And what does it mean? Well, I look at it as, if you remember in class, one of the lessons 1 through 10, creativity, right? If you were to take a baby and put it in a swing, right, and push that thing, right, it would make the same symbol, right? And what's one of the things they teach you how to do in the military is not only pack what's known as a day pack, but when you have kids, because they teach you how to, take care of children, they show you how to pack stuff, right? You're going to need extra clothes. You're probably going to need diapers, right? You're going to need other things. You're going to probably need formula, extra, extra, I don't know, pudding, or, Gerber, whatever. Let's put some toys in there, etc. Maybe some of you don't have children, so you get an animal or a pet or a dog. Same concept if you go on a small hike, right? You got to bring extra water, a bowl, so on and so forth. Maybe a towel because there's water and the dog gets in, so the, thing wet, or a sheet for the back of your car, and it keeps you prepared, right? But there's different ways of going about it. So, when we teach visually, auditorily, and physically as well, and it expedites the learning process. Sometimes we just say, we're going to break this down Barney style. So let's continue. Because at the end of the day, what you're doing is taking care of children. So I look at that symbol and I play the game and I hear the history and the people in it. And I guess it takes a family to raise a village. But, just as in culture does, I mean, capoeira came from dancing, so on and so forth, because people weren't allowed to do martial arts or practice self-defense. But then we have break dancers, right? And then break dancers are, well, what capoeira is with martial arts, etc., as well as understanding of timing and rhythm. So when you hear a boxer say, oh, he has broken rhythm, right? It's also a fighting reference as well. Or, he's in step. Just like in dancing, it's moving with the beat or something that they're listening to, because all you have to do is stay on something within the musical notes and you're good. So you could do the tempo, musicality, etc. Let's go forward. How do some afford the world no matter what, but others still suffer? So let's say that again. So how do some afford the world no matter what, but some still suffer, right? And then, of course, people would be like, oh, well, suffering's, this life is about suffering, this, that, and the third. And, the question I have for them is it really, right? because it depends on the person that's saying it, right? Look at their background, their story. Were things handed to them? Were things earned? Was it, just given to them? How did they obtain it? Once you have those levels of credibility, then the story becomes more valid, and it also makes it stronger when sharing amongst others, yada yada. And I'll come up to why I keep saying yada yada or yada yada in my video today later on. But if you're enjoying class, excuse me, if you're enjoying class, go ahead and hit the like button, go ahead and share this and subscribe, etc. This is something that is more condensed just because of certain things that have gone on. I was just like, you know what? People keep saying woke and this and that, and I just want to give my voice, my point of view, also for my niece and nephew, so that when they get older and they have questions, they will be able to jumpstart the process of understanding what's going on around them. Thankfully, they also have a smart mother. So let's continue. Does Doke, what is it saying? Does Doe work hard, or do they hardly work, right? Doe, right? So Sound of Music, doe, a deer, a female deer, right? But doe is also what you call money, yes? So does doe work hard, right? If you are a doe, right? Because if they don't know your name, they call you a John Doe or Jane Doe. Do they work hard, or are they hardly working, right? So this will come from like law enforcement, law training, or, if you studied any books or went to a law library, you can start understanding certain things. And then, of course, you speak to other teachers, i.e. people older than you, hang out with them. They're really smart. And they'll be able to assist you along the way of your process of, well, not only just waking up to what's going on, but what really matters in the world, right? So one person once said, people are so concerned about changing things. How about you go make money first and then try to change it? And that's a little backwards. And I'll explain why later, because if you think about it, you can, if you use your sword, your words, the things coming out of your mouth to communicate with everybody else. So let's continue. If technology makes life easier, why do people work so hard, right? Now that we have AI and everything else, why are people still working so hard, right? Why is it so difficult for a business to upgrade an application that integrates certain necessities in order to hit the time correctly, right? So what do I mean by this, right? Let's say you're on a project, etc., and you have 6 months to do the project. Well, what if there was a way to input everything, etc., right? Just list it out. These are my things. I have to get it done by these dates. Think project management, right? Or task manager, right? And then tell AI to optimize it so that not only you end early, you still leave room to double check your work, and then you'll be more efficient, right? So like Monday.com is a task management tool. Asana, you can use something like that. But, and integrate it with AI, and I mean, it would be a lot faster, and so would everything else, which means you make money faster, yes or yes? I don't know. Which means people can also get more done in a more efficient manner using less energy to put that energy into something else, but you also get to make more money in return. So they would also probably, I don't know, get a raise or something. So because, a rising, rising tides, raise all ships or something like that. Anyways, if science works and the truth is said in jest, then is ST real? Now, what do I mean by ST? You could think, how do I say this? The Super Bowl, right? The halftime show, or, the commercials that come up like Star Trek, right? With marketers saying stuff dressed as Star Trek characters and everything. And they're playing around and they're like, oh, the emotions on this person, blah, 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 blah. It didn't come up, how do I say this? As a top hit. So it's going to probably be difficult to find, but it was definitely there in one of the Super Bowl halftimes. And, it was one of those things. I saw it and I was like, aha, so forth, right? So is that real, right? Would Star Trek be real? And if so, does the science in Star Trek, exist? Which means there's advanced, medical training or technology that can assist people. Combine 3D printing with organs, have a perfect match so that, people don't have to end up somewhere and, oh, I need a kidney, and then now you're on a list and you got to wait for the kidney, blah, blah, blah. Or you could go somewhere else, get a kidney faster, but it's not the most legal method, right? But if you had a 3D printer and you were also able to replicate certain things, I think the Impossible Burger, which I think Bill Gates is behind or invested in. And, he owns Microsoft. I mean, think about it. So could he not also capitalize in the medical field for helping people do things like that, like think interchangeable parts, etc. That's why when you go to AutoZone or whatever, they have a specific number that correlates to the part that goes in your specific vehicle. That would be genius. And if so, is it real and why hasn't it been used yet? Think about it, right? What was the title of the last class that came out that dealt with secrets? So let's go forward. If words have power, does noise contain the same within it? So if anybody has listened to people like Billy Carlson, and then other podcasters that are in that realm, right? They talk about, oh, well, music used to be played at this amount of hertz, but John D. Rockefeller, not John D., John D. Rockefeller. Apparently, John D. is not John D. from the book The Immortal Life of Nicholas Flamel or any other fictitious thing. It's John D. Rockefeller. Now, why do I make this connection? Because if you were to believe one thing, right? If I told you this was money here, and I didn't tell you where here was to confuse you, and then send you on a trip and you try to use it to purchase, let's say, headphones or whatever in another country, well, would your money and the belief in that thing, because it also respects the area of wherever you're doing commerce, would it be more valuable or less valuable in the area in which that you go to? Think about it, right? Because the currency conversion thing is something that actually exists, right? When China announced that they built, some type of more efficient and better AI for $5 million, they didn't convert it into their currency. See, if you were to use a calculator, look at that, and then just change the currency title, then they spent a lot more than 5 million. Yes or yes, right? It's just that the value sounded differently and it would upset, or as they say in that song with Jay-Z and Kanye West, it gets the people going, right? That's how they also play with emotions and the key words and how your brain picks up things. And you can read that in any psychology book or science book or watch a movie and you'll figure it out. So think about that, right? Now, let's go forward to the next point. So, can sound heal? So, you remember earlier I talked about the hertz and the power of noise, so on and so forth, but they talked about how it has healing abilities. Well, why not combine that with a, let's say, 20-minute session, right? And see what happens, because remember, the frequency changed because it would damage bodies and disrupt the cells, i.e. population control, right? And the products that go into food, well, it's just like plagiarism. However, there's people profiteering by also dabbling in population control because of the side effects of the crap that is being put out there that you ingest. You ever ask why? Would you do the same thing to your car? Would you do the same thing to your child, right? No, you make sure it's organic, etc. And if the sound thing works, well, you already know about ultrasounds. You know how they can use sound waves to break up certain things like tumors or whatever. So why not start employing it, right? At least try it, see if it works. What's it gonna cost you, right? A few minutes while you go for a walk, if that works that way, or making a little adjustment to how you produce music in order to heal the audience and not kill them at the same time. If it works, right? Unless it's just BS, a false belief system or whatever. But think about it. Now, if the Fibonacci sequence is found in many things like art, right? When you make a fist, the Fibonacci sequence ends up there, right? The spiral on a shell is the Fibonacci sequence, and then the breakdown, right? So remember in art class, or should I say the section of art within class, I discussed this with the Fibonacci sequence and how it correlates to certain things. So if the Fibonacci sequence can be found in many things, then cannot someone say that God, other things are in other things? Let's see, etc. So in the Bible, they talk about, Abraham with a ram or a lamb, so on and so forth. Well, it had the Fibonacci sequence. Think about why, right? And then, of course, you have your ear that is structured like the Fibonacci sequence. And this is all within mathematics, and mathematics plays into science, and anything that has not been described or taught by, instructors and deemed science will be seen as something different and as such. So think about how the words correlate, because if it is, as Dr. Jordan Peterson says, a small library, then what is an iPhone but a digital one, right? However, it's harder to change words that are already been printed, so that's why they burn books, so they could tweak certain things. Think Mandela effect. Let's move forward. Can science release new things if someone opens the door first? So, if the rules are that someone else is ruling the realm, but there's been rules established, right? And this comes from Simon Sinek's The Infinite versus the, the Infinite Game, I think it is, right? So, some people think of a game as being finite, right? Like the quickest distance between 2 points is a straight line. That's it. I don't have to do no more. I have to go from point A to point B. But life and other things do not work out that way, hence the term the infinite game, because at one point you're going to say, how much do I need to do in order to acquire the things that I want to acquire so that I can get to point B or D or F or Z, right? And then you try a lot of things over and over again, burning a lot of energy, and then everything is just sucking the life out of you, right? So think about it. When people say, oh, they have city miles, well, that's probably because they come from a large city like New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Miami, whatever, Orlando, Dallas, Houston, etc. Austin. And then, of course, because of that stress, they look older, right? So they say, oh, they have city miles, right? Oh, you must live in the suburbs. You look young as hell, because they have less stress and they're able to control certain things in their environment more efficiently, right? Their air conditioning, so they're regulating their body temperature, unlike people that live in other places, right? Because they have the capability of doing so. So definitely look at that, because if they open the door using, let's say, a movie or a TV show, right? Or you find a book, right? This is why teachers tell you to cite your work, so they could be like, are you just making this up, or where did you get it from? Because they need proof, right? Remember, I said that more logical people need tangible proof in order to accept what is in front of them as being valid. So also in a courtroom, you have case law, because you have to pull facts from history in order to sometimes get the courts to establish an appeal, or for the judge to go ahead and dictate, well, let's take an exception because, well, there was an exception made before, hence case law, and understanding, well, not only the liberal arts, but history within the specific details of one's life. That's why in the TV show Suits, Harvey Specter talks about loyalty, because he needs to know everything, because if he can't know everything, he can't protect you, right? That mentality works well with attorneys and lawyers, as well as other professions. So let's continue. So how does Saturn and the sun work together, right? So in certain shows, or if you studied magic or mentalism, they would do Denmark, right? Elephants in Denmark or something like that, and they would get you to think, don't think of a white elephant, yada yada. And then of course they go into a story. Oh, what was the first thing that popped into your head? And you would say white elephant. I would say Hamburg. And then, of course, what does Hamburg, Mecca, New York City, and other places have in common? Well, remember the black cube, right? See, the cap and gown is also a representation of the black cube, right? You got to cap it, right? Why do you put a cap on? Well, to stop someone at a certain point, right? Or to make fun of them, you would say that they're capping because you know something they don't. So when they speak, you can say that they're capping, i.e. lying, right? Maybe the information got twisted, someone doesn't know what they're saying, whatever the case, all right? So let's go into, okay, now I'm probably going to say some stuff that might offend some people, but maybe it'll also wake them up right now, right? Does a WAP, an amp, and a paw have something in common? Well, it depends how the letters and words are arranged, right? If you listen to Cardi B, she knows what a WAP is, right? And then, of course, that's played over and over again, and then the children repeat it. But not many people have a problem when they're singing along to a song or rapping to it, right? Right? Ring Around the Rosie, what is it about? Nobody had an issue if it came out a certain way and the children were saying it, right? What is a amp? Well, if we flip the W upside down, make it into an M, jumble the letters up, still using the same shapes because of art class, we understand this, yes, and creativity. An amp only amplifies certain things. Well, does sound get stronger with amplification? Well, that's a physics issue. And in order to understand amplification, you have to understand what are the ohms, right? Because if you're hooking up your car and its sound system, you have to know the ohms and the amps, right? And then the wattage and everything else in order to increase the output of the speakers or the bass. And then what does a paw mean for anybody, right? Well, if you listen to The Jungle Book when Baloo is singing, right? Not Blue's Clues, not Bluey, Baloo with Mowgli, right? He's saying about the claw and the, be aware of the big paw, right? Well, who's paw, right? Who's a paw, right? So, does a WAP, an amp, and a paw have anything in common? Well, if you put all those together after the explanation, then yes. Now the question is, why do you now see that? Or maybe you haven't seen it, you just needed somebody to connect the dots for you first, so now that you can explain it to others. I guess that would also be birds and bees, but something else. So, if science built the Titanic, why did they not know about icebergs, right? See, in the movie and in certain areas, they say, oh, well, the captain or somebody on the ship got so cocky and confident in the technology that they thought they could ram right through it, and it caused an issue. Instead of trying to avert it, right? Because they understood there's a freaking iceberg there, and there's more subconscious beneath the surface, right, than what meets the eye, the small part showing above the water, right? Think of the back of a dollar bill, right? So if an iceberg has a lot within the subconscious, but only this part is showing, then why would you try to go through it when the ship is not designed to, one, not do that? Instead, go around, sense the circle, right? Here, right? So why not go around, right? That would be smarter. Instead, someone made a mistake, got too cocky, confident, probably emotions were developed, got some people, hurt, but you understand that. And then of course there's the whole thing that this guy could have fit on the ship or on the board, once it was going down. What was his name? Jack. But he let the other person go. Did that really happen though? I mean, think about it. Was it dramatized? Because if it's so, put both people in that situation, and then you would understand a little bit more of what they were trying to tell you, right? Anyways, let's move forward because we could get into that in another video. So, does time plus experience make one an experienced professional? Well, you have to ask, well, one, what is a professional? Two, what is identified as experience? And then, of course, well, if you take the first two letters of experience, EX, right, and then put it with professional, you have EXP, right, which is an experience. But where does the part of professional or that title or label come from, right? Because then you have experts. And what's the difference? Then you have specialists, so on and so forth. But what's the difference? Is it the time, right? Is it the grade? Oh, did you go to high school? Did you go to college? Did you go to 8th grade? Did you go get your master's or your doctorates? Where is the professionalism, right? And then, of course, if you're a label type person, because you prefer whatever, did you go to Harvard? Did you go to Stanford, etc., right? But you go to certain areas and you realize they don't focus on the Nikes or the Adidas. They might wear Vans or they might wear something else, and then everybody gets to still be, not only express themselves, be, how do I say this, different at the same time, but they are also telling you a lot about them because, well, monkey see, monkey do comes from lotto. And if you want to go to Harvard, then you have to dress and act like such, right? And the thing is that when you're presenting to enter the school, I'm pretty sure it's not the same way they respond on social media, in person, on the street, in the bar, etc. Think about it. If they did, would the person with more experience, i.e. time, years in, that's done this forever, would they accept them, right? If they got to see all of them, not just a part of them, and then find out later that it was just a facade. So they get a lot of information, right? But information costs money. I guess that's why these schools cost so much, because it's not the information that they're teaching, it's the networking, as I said earlier when I made the reference in business to net profit, that they're associating with this, right? So it's the networking with the other individuals within that vicinity that they are networking with, right? Which would also come down to the phrase, it's not just what you know, it's who you know, right? And a great network would help you out a lot, especially if you have time and experience with those people. So I read this the other day and I was at a bank and somebody was like, oh, what's black and red all over? And I was like, oh, a newspaper, right? And she was like, wow, that was quick. I was like, that's extremely old. I said, I've heard this for years, so I knew the answer. But if you're driving down the street is also black and white. Yes, the yellow lines, but if it was a one way, it would be black and white. And if there is a stop sign or a light, it would also be red or red all over, right? So what's black and white and red all over? Well, both the street, abbreviation for that is ST, and, well, a newspaper, right? Because you read a newspaper, right? And past tense would be, oh, I read that, right? But if you need to be more specific or you want to see something, you have to go outside. And if you have to travel, you have to use a vehicle. And of course, the street is black and white, and there's stop signs or red lights to show you, or brakes, for instance, that are also red all over. If there were blue lights, would you still stop? Depends on the type of light, and then the shade and the coloring, right? If they were purple, yada yada. Now, why did I say yada yada? Because, well, Megan Thee Stallion, body yada 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 yada. Now, what does a WAP have in common, right? Does music heal? Can it convince people to do something? Because when they regurgitate the words, it also casts like this words of affirmation that go over and over and over again in their head. So they associate that and eventually either, do or don't do what is said because it's been repeated so many times. All right. So last but not least, and this is the final point, right? So is philosophy similar to a riddle? So why do I say is philosophy similar to a riddle? Well, if you ask a psychologist, they would probably agree with that statement. If you ask or say that to someone else who is, let's say, in the medical field, they would probably agree with that statement. They would understand it very quickly. And then, of course, if you were to speak to somebody that's in the logical field, they may ask more questions to understand, right? Because that's normally what logic tries to do. It tries to understand. The creative people will be asking questions because not only are they trying to understand, they are also trying to create their own understanding to make it easier for them, right? So instead of using a word like, or should I say many words, right? Like, this is hard to understand. The faster or the more shortcuts you're able to make with your speech and communication, you can say, yeah, this is incomprehensible. Now, someone who doesn't understand the term would not know what incomprehensible or comprehensible would mean unless given the definition, and the definition is always longer than the word. So you can use shorthand in order to get your point across a lot quicker and a lot faster. So think about that, because there's different ways to abbreviate things. So with or without is a W/with. W/O is without, right? Or WO or OW, right? And if you jumble that up because it's saying something, right? It also looks like the word owl. So I will talk to you guys in another video, or should I say another lesson in class. And I want you guys to, understand, what does an owl have to do with anything, if it's a logo or mean anything or a symbol somewhere. So till next time, my friends, take care. Have a great one. Mwah. Peace. And apologies for my voice and things like that. I left my body armor, or, how I always have a water bottle. But yeah. So think about everything that I stated. Think about the Impossible Burger. Think about everything else that I stated with the medical community, and how you can also, if they can make a burger out of something fake using stem cells, couldn't they heal family members? So peace, adios, and yeah.